The consistency when it comes to the big three is absolutely unparalleled. 18 straight victories, 38 straight finals, 63 straight semifinals. It is absolutely out of this world ridiculous. But for the sake of today's video, we are going to pretend that those three never played tennis. It never existed. So we are going to just erase everything and rewrite the tennis history books from 2003 up until today's day in 2021. But first of all, let me just mention that this video will be in two parts because I think it would be too long to do it from 2003 to 2021. So I divided it 2003, 2011, and then after that 2012, 2021. And first of all, let me just mention that the 2003 Australian Open was won by Andre Agassi. Here are his initials, and here is his CV. He's going to be labeled with color gray in this video. Now the French Open was won by Juan Carlos Ferrero, a little bit of orange, a little bit of yellow. Here is his CV, and the US Open was won by Andy Roddick. Here are his initials, and here is his CV. Now let's go back a little bit to 2003 Wimbledon, Roger Federer's first major. I think it would have been won by Andy Roddick also, so let's add a Wimbledon to Andy Roddick's resume because he lost in the semis to Roger Federer. It was 3-0, but I just don't see anybody else beating Andy Roddick on that tournament. I think he would beat Mark Philippoussis in the final, possibly Marty Fish, Feliciano Lopez in the semifinals. I think Andy Roddick would win his first ever major at the 2003 Wimbledon edition. Now let's go to 2004, and it's still only about Roger Federer existing or not because a baby Novak Djokovic isn't a factor. And although Rafael Nadal has had great results, especially when you compare him to a 17-year-old that's not Maria Sharapova, Rafa still isn't a major factor. He only played two majors, the Australian Open and the US Open. So yeah, it's still only about Roger Federer, and in this case, this would be really interesting when it comes to 2004 Australian Open, because if not Federer, it means Hewitt and Nalbandian quarterfinal. That would be really interesting in 2004. I have no clue who wins that match. I guess I would go with Leighton Hewitt. In the semifinals, it's Juan Carlos Ferrero against the winner of that match. That would probably be a bloodbath. And then Marat Safin, the eventual finalist. But Marat Safin played 2 5-setters before that, but Marat Safin won the 2005 edition. He's already a Grand Slam champion. So I went with Marat Safin winning his second Grand Slam and first Australian Open back in actually 2004. Now let's go to the French Open. Roger Federer lost to Gustavo Kuerten in the third round, 6-4, 6-4, 6-4. Same result as Novak to Cole Schreiber in 2009 third round. Wow, that's really a random fact. Anyways, it is still Gaston Gaudio winning that tournament. GG. First ever Roland Garros for him. Now let's go to the Wimbledon. This would be really interesting without Federer because it would be Ivo Karlovic versus Leighton Hewitt in the quarterfinals. That's crazy. And then Sebastian Grosjean in the semis. But I think it doesn't really matter. It's still Andy Roddick, or it's not still Andy Roddick. It's Andy Roddick in this case. It's still Andy Roddick in the finals, but this time it's Andy Roddick winning the tournament to win his second Wimbledon. He's the back-to-back champion right now. Wow, what a crazy world. And then, of course, the US Open. So this was kind of tough for me because it probably would have been Leighton Hewitt versus Andre Agassi in the finals. I looked up their head-to-heads. It was 4-4. Some really exciting matches, 2002 US Open. But I think Agassi, because he took 2 sets away from Federer and Hewitt had 2 bagels, I think Agassi would beat Hewitt in that final. And I think before that he would beat Tim Herman in the semis. So I got Andre Agassi winning his 9th major and his 3rd US Open at the 2004 edition. 2005 is the perfect example that this video is absolutely crazy. It doesn't make any sense. It's too science fiction. Even a real-life winner like Marat Safin could lose in this scenario because Marat Safin did in fact win the 2005 Australian Open, and he did in fact beat Roger Federer in the semifinals, and he did in fact beat Leighton Hewitt in the finals. This was, by the way, one of the rare Roger Federer losses in this era when it comes to Grand Slam tournaments and in general, of course. Now, if there is no Federer, it means it's Baghdatis and Agassi in the quarterfinals. Interesting matchup. But let's say Agassi wins. So Agassi, the 2004 US Open champion in this case, versus the 2004 Australian Open champion Marat Safin in the semifinals. Really an interesting matchup, and you can make an argument that Agassi would beat Safin, but let's go with Safin. So Safin is in the finals versus Hewitt. It's easy, right? Everything stays the same. Well, Hewitt played Rafael Nadal in the fourth round, and it was 5 long sets. So what if somebody else is there instead of Rafael Nadal? What if there is an easier opponent for Leighton Hewitt in the fourth round? Is he a bit fresher in the finals? Because he did in fact win the first set quite convincingly versus Marat Safin in the finals. Interesting thought. But what if there is somebody else from that side of the draw, from Rafael Nadal's side of the draw, like a Michal Yuzhny? Could he beat Leighton Hewitt in the fourth round? And could he perhaps make it all the way to the finals to be, or to make it a all-Russian final at the 2005 Australian Open? Could he perhaps beat Marat Safin? Interesting. Yuzhny is a interesting tennis player. But I just had to go with Marat Safin. Plenty of experience, and I just couldn't take it away from him. But bunch of crazy scenarios here. Same with the 2005 French Open. And I guess a lot of you would go with Mariano Puerta, right? The guy, the one-year wonder, the one-hit wonder, the one Roland Garros wonder with a little bit of doping on top of it. But nevertheless, I think a lot of you would give Mariano Puerta the 2005 French Open. Well, I didn't. I went with somebody else who was a former number one and who was a former champion at this tournament. I went with Carlos Moya. And you can say, wow, Carlos Moya, from where does he come from? Like, he lost really early to Roger Federer. Well, listen, if there is no Roger Federer, he faces Fernando Gonzalez, which would be a super interesting matchup in the fourth round. And then the winner of that match, let's say it's Carlos Moya, I think it's a coin flip, would face Victor Hanescu in the quarterfinals. Victor Hanescu never played in the quarterfinals ever again, and even before that. So the winner would be a favorite. And then in the semifinals is David Ferrer versus, instead of Rafael Nadal, Sebastian Grosjean or Richard Gasquet, who was really young. So it's like really complicated, really interesting. Ferrer already played the 5-setter. I don't know who's the winner there, but I guess Carlos Moya would be the favorite in that match. And then, of course, in the final against Mariano Puerta, who played 2 5-setters before that. So that's why I went with Carlos Moya, his second ever French Open, first after 1998. Now, Wimbledon 2005, I guess this was the easiest one for me in this year because it's still Andy Roddick, who's, I guess, a super experienced champion when it comes to Wimbledon, his third straight Wimbledon. I guess it would have been Juan Carlos Ferrero versus Fernando Gonzalez in the quarterfinals if there is no Federer, and then Leighton Hewitt in the semifinals versus the winner of that match. So whoever plays Andy Roddick would be an outsider, would be an underdog in 2005 Wimbledon final. And I think Andy Roddick has the perfect play for grass, and I think Andy Roddick would win back-to-back Wimbledons. Now let's go to the 2005 US Open. Australian Open was already explained. US Open. So this was really complicated for me because it would have been Nalbandian versus Hewitt in the semifinals if there is no Federer. So let's cut it short. It would be Hewitt and Agassi in the finals again. And, you know, I like to have it 1-1. I had Roger Rafa 2010-2011 finals 1-1 if there is no Novak. So I will have Agassi Hewitt 1-1 in the 2004 and 2005 US Open. I think that's the most fairest scenario. So Leighton Hewitt, 1 Wimbledon, 2 US Opens, double US Open champion, former number 1, wins his second US Open in 2005. And that's pretty much it when it comes to 2005. Roger Federer is the sole factor of the 2006 Australian Open when it comes to the big three. Novak was out in the first round. Nadal wasn't even playing. So it's Federer in the final defeating Marcus Baghdatis 3-1. So I guess Baghdatis is still in the finals, although he was really tired. But let's say that Baghdatis made it all the way into the finals, and he faces who? Well, it's Tommy Haas and Nikolai Davydenko in one of the quarterfinals without Roger Federer. So I guess it's Davydenko, although he also played a bunch of 4 and 5-setters. And then the winner of that match faces Nicholas Kiefer. Again, I guess it's Davydenko, although he's really tired. And then it's Davydenko and Baghdatis in the finals. 2-2 is their head-to-head score, their head-to-head matchup results. And I went with Marcos Baghdatis. So Marcos Baghdatis wins his first ever Grand Slam at the 2006 Australian Open. I think he deserves this. Now, let's go to the French Open. All 3 of them are a factor. Novak quarterfinal and, of course, the first Vidal Grand Slam final. So, Kyle Monfils, Leighton Hewitt quarterfinal. And the winner of that match faces Ivan Ljubicic in the semifinals. By the way, I had Ivan Ljubicic winning this tournament in the scenario without Rafa and Nadal because I thought that Roger Federer cannot possibly win 11 Grand Slams because nobody can win 11 straight Grand Slams. So nevertheless, I guess a really inexperienced Gael Monfils would perhaps play 4 sets versus Ivan Ljubicic. And then there's a possibility for a all-Croatian final because Ančić would have been playing Nalbandian, and Nalbandian forfeited to Roger Federer, so therefore perhaps a all-Croatian final in this scenario. And I went with Ivan Ljubicic winning his first ever Grand Slam. Now let's go to the Wimbledon. Another Fedal final, but without them, it's really chaotic. Perhaps it's Andre Agassi and Jarko Nieminen in the quarterfinals, and the winner faces Marcus Baghdatis. And then it's Berdych and Ančić or Yuzhny versus Jonas Björkman in the other semifinal. So I guess perhaps it's really young Tomasz Berdych or Jonas Björkman versus Marcus Baghdatis, and I went with Marcus Baghdatis again because I like Marcus Baghdatis. He's a great, awesome, cool player. So Marcus Baghdatis wins 2 Grand Slams in 2006. Now let's go to the U.S. Open. Kind of a mainstream result here because, in my opinion, it would have been Andy Roddick. So Andy Roddick, 3 Wimbledons, 2 U.S. Opens because it's Blake or Davydenko versus Andy Roddick in that final. And I will always think that Andy Roddick would be a favorite there. So that's your 2006 season. 2007 Australian Open is also really interesting. So it was Novak and Roger in the 4th round. Roger, of course, winning because he was the eventual winner. And it was Gonzalez defeating Rafael Nadal in the quarterfinals. So let's just pretend that Nadal is not here. Gonzalez is still in the finals. Who does he face if there is no Roger? Well, it's either Tommy Robredo or Andy Roddick. So it's possibly Andy Roddick. And I looked up Gonzalez versus Roddick head-to-head. Roddick leads him 9-3. But I think it's just unfair to take this tournament away from Fernando Gonzalez. I think he was playing great. I actually remember this tournament. I was really young, 9 years old, one of my first tennis memories. And I thought that he played excellent tennis, so I think it's unfair. It would be unfair for me to take away the 2007 Australian Open from Fernando Gonzalez. Now let's go to the French Open. Big 3 in the semifinals, so this is going to be super interesting without them. I guess it's Nikolai Davydenko versus Tommy Robredo again in the semifinals. And I would give it to Nikolai Davydenko here because he played a tougher, closer match against Roger Federer. It was 7-5, 7-6, 7-6. 3 ultra-close sets versus Roger Federer. And I guess it's Carlos Moya, the champion, the 2-time champion in this scenario, versus Fernando Verdasco or Igor Andreev in the other semifinal. Completely random. So I guess maybe it's Moya versus Davydenko in the final, and I just decided to give it to Davydenko. I guess Nikolai Davydenko, it's time. He played a couple of semifinals, he played a couple of quarterfinals. I guess it's time for Nikolai Davydenko to win his first French Open. I guess Carlos Moya was too old back in 2007, so that's my argument. Nevertheless, you can go with anybody here. Now, the 2007 Wimbledon is even more chaotic because the quarterfinals would be Roddick Gasquet, which ended up Gasquet winning, I think it was 8-6 in the 5th set. That's the only real quarterfinal that stays. So I guess it's Safin and Ferrero in one of the quarterfinals, which would face Gasquet. And then it's Hewitt versus Baghdatis instead of Hewitt versus Novak. That was a epic 5-setter. And then it's Berdych versus Yuzhny instead of Berdych versus Nadal. So the winner of Hewitt Baghdatis, Berdych Yuzhny is in the final. The winner of Gasquet Roddick again, part 2, I guess if you're rerunning everything because I'm rerunning every single match, versus Safin Ferrero. And I have Safin here because Safin lost in the 3rd round to Federer, but Safin is a, I guess, double Grand Slam champion here, or triple Grand Slam champion, in fact. So, I mean, I guess perhaps it's, I don't know, Safin or maybe even Gasquet versus Baghdatis in the finals, but Baghdatis is the defending champion. I mean, you can go with anybody here, but I have Marcus Baghdatis defending his crown, so Marcus Baghdatis is a double Wimbledon champion and 3 Grand Slams overall for Marcus Baghdatis. What a crazy world. And of course, the 2007 US Open without Federer and Djokovic in the final, it would have been Roddick versus Davydenko in one of the semifinals, and Moya versus David Ferrer. That's completely random. Carlos Moya, David Ferrer, US Open 2007 semifinal. That's so random. And I think the winner of Davydenko Roddick is the winner of the tournament here. And I went with Andy Roddick. I think he has more experience. More experience. I apologize. I already went with Nikolai Davydenko at the 2007 French Open. So yeah, I think Andy Roddick is a 6-time Grand Slam champion in this scenario. I don't think that anybody was stopping Gilles-Wilfried Tsonga at the 2008 Australian Open, besides of course the real-life winner Novak Djokovic, who did in fact stop him, or maybe Roger Federer, because Tsonga defeated Rafael Nadal in the semifinals, and it would have been Jarkko Nieminen in that semifinal instead of Nadal. So yeah, Tsonga is still in the final, and he faces off with Bertie Blake, Ferrer, or Hewitt in that final. You can maybe pick Leighton Hewitt, but I still have Gilles-Wilfried Tsonga winning his first ever major at the 2008 Australian Open. Now let's go to the French Open. This is kind of crazy. This is completely random. So it's Verdasco Almagro in one of the quarterfinals, Paul-Henri Mathieu, Ernest Gulbis in the other quarterfinals. The two winners face off in the semifinals. So let's have Ernest Gulbis in the final of the 2008 French Open. And it's Julien Benneteau instead of Roger Federer in the other semifinal against Gael Monfils. And Gael Monfils took a set away from Roger Federer. So I have Monfils Gulbis in the 2008 French Open final. And I have Gael Monfils winning his first ever major at the 2008 French Open. What a great year for the French tennis players. Tsonga and Monfils, back-to-back Grand Slam champions. Now let's go to the Wimbledon. So of course there is no epic Fedal final. It is Ancic Safin in one of the semifinals, and Schüttler Murray. It's really hard to pronounce Schüttler without completely butchering it up. Schüttler Murray in the other semifinal, and I think Murray wins that. And it's Safin and Murray, and I think it's too early. It's too early for Andy Murray, so I have Marat Safin winning another Grand Slam, his first ever Wimbledon, but his fourth overall major. But this loss, this Andy Murray loss, helps him at the 2008 US Open because it's Query Fish versus Murray in one of the semifinals, and it's Roddick Robredo versus Andreev Muller in the other semifinals. So whoever faces Andy Murray, and I have Andy Roddick, I think Andy Murray is a slight favorite here because he was playing great in late 2008. I actually looked up the head-to-head between Roddick and Murray. It's 9-3 Murray, of course, different eras, and Andy Roddick was kind of semi-retiring by the time that Andy Murray got better. And in 2008, it was kind of weird, a lot of forfeiting, a lot of withdrawing, but one real match, and Andy Murray won that 2-1. So I have Andy Murray winning the 2008 US Open. So he wins his first major 4 years earlier than in real life. So I kind of spoiled the 2009 Australian Open winner without the big three in one of my previous videos. It should pop up right now in the card somewhere. Anyways, I was talking about the most unlikely Grand Slam winners without the big three on each and every Grand Slam. And I had the 2009 Australian Open won by Fernando Verdasco. And guess what? I'm sticking to that prediction. I'm sticking to my word. I still have Fernando Verdasco winning the 2009 Australian Open. Why? Well, the guy was playing out of his freaking mind. He beat the first three guys, giving up only 12 games. And then he beat Andy Murray in the fourth round. And then he almost prevented Rafael Nadal from reaching the final, which was his only Australian Open victory in his career. So Fernando Verdasco was playing great. And he would play Gilles Simon in that semifinal instead of Rafael Nadal. I think that is a victory for Fernando Verdasco. And then in the final, Bogdanis, Roddick, Del Potro, or Berdic. Good, tough opponents, interesting matchups, but I still have Fernando Verdasco winning that tournament. Now, let's go to the 2009 French Open, another interesting case. So it was Soderling Gonzalez in one of the semifinals. It was 3-2 Robin Soderling. And it would have been without Federer, of course, because Nadal and Djokovic weren't factors on that tournament. Well, somewhat. There were factors, but not really in the finish. Del Potro versus Monfils or Haas. Interesting matchup. So Gael Monfils, the defending champion in this scenario, versus Tommy Haas, the guy who almost beat Roger Federer in real life in one of the quarterfinals. And then the winner of that match faces Juan Martin Del Potro, who also almost beat Roger Federer at the 2009 French Open. So it's really interesting. And I had Del Potro actually reaching the final. And I looked up the Soderling Del Potro head-to-head. It's 4-1 Del Potro. And I think Del Potro was young, was hungry, was great. And I have Juan Martin Del Potro winning the 2009 French Open. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, let's go to the Wimbledon. So, it was, of course, Roger Federer, Andy Roddick, 16-14, fifth set. Without Roger Federer, it is Tommy Haas or maybe even Ivo Karlovic in that final. So imagine a Karlovic-Roddick ace-fast at the final, but I think Andy Roddick would be a favorite, especially in the scenario, and I have Andy Roddick winning his fourth Wimbledon. By the way, I kind of realized that the colors are kind of messed up. I don't have enough colors, and the rows are also kind of messed up, so I'm fixing this. But anyways, I have Andy Roddick winning his fourth Wimbledon at the 2009 edition. And then let's go to the US Open. Gonzalez Del Potro semifinal 1, Verdasco Soderling semifinal 2. Interesting matchup, but I think Juan Martin Del Potro is the winner here. He won in real life. I cannot take it away from Del Potro in this scenario. So Juan Martin Del Potro wins 2 majors in 2009. How great is that? At the 2010 Australian Open, it was Andy Murray losing to Roger Federer in the final. But there is no Roger Federer, so I guess it's still Andy Murray versus Davydenko or Tsonga. So let's pick Tsonga because he was the 2008 champion in this case or in this scenario. And I was really close to go with Gilbert Tsonga over Andy Murray in 2010, but then I googled their head-to-head record, and it's 14-2 Andy Murray. So I went with Andy Murray. Andy Murray is a double Grand Slam champion in 2010, early 2010, may I add. Now let's go to the French Open, and this was really empty. This was really pale without the big three. It's Ginepri Meltzer versus Omagro Hewitt. And then out of those 4, somebody's in the final versus Robin Soderling. And I think Robin Soderling would win against either of those 4 players. So I have Robin Soderling winning his first major at the 2010 French Open. Robin Soderling is a Grand Slam champion. Now let's go to the Wimbledon. Tomasz Berdych was the spoiler here because he beat Federer in the quarterfinals and then he beat Novak in the semifinals. But then, of course, he lost to Rafa in the finals. So this is interesting. It's still Tomasz Berdych in that final versus Robin Soderling or Andy Murray. That's an interesting matchup, especially on grass. So the 2 recent Grand Slam champions meet in the semifinals. And the head-to-head score here is 3-2 Murray. Interesting, tight. And I went with Andy Murray, and then I went with Andy Murray again. And Andy Murray is a Wimbledon champion in 2010. I think he would beat Tomasz Berdych in that final. So Andy Murray only needs the French Open to have all 4 slams in 2010. Wow, how crazy is that? And now let's go to the US Open. This is kind of weird. So it would have been Yuzhny Verdasco in the semifinals without Nadal. And Verdasco would, I think, I think he would beat Yuzhny. I think he's 2-0 against Yuzhny head-to-head. And then on the other side of the draw, Soderling-Meltzer quarterfinal, I have Soderling. Monfils-Fish quarterfinal, I have Monfils. And then Soderling-Monfils semifinal. Soderling is 3-0 head-to-head versus Monfils. So the final is Verdasco-Soderling. Verdasco, the 2009 Australian Open champion. Soderling, the 2010 French Open champion. And I think Robin Soderling would be the favorite here. He's 5-2 overall versus Verdasco. It's a hard court. I think Robin Soderling wins the 2010 US Open. Robin Soderling is a double Grand Slam champion in 2010. The consistency when it comes to Big Three members in 2011, maybe even contrary to belief, was absolutely ridiculously good. You will remember 2011 as Novak Djokovic's season, but Nadal and Federer were always there, and even Andy Murray was always there. He was exclusively losing to the Big Three members when it comes to Grand Slams. So does that mean that Andy Murray will be a multiple-time Grand Slam champion in 2011? Well, let's find out. Let's start off with the 2011 Australian Open. Andy Murray was a finalist in real life. And let's replay this tournament. It's Cilic or Ferrer against Murray in the semifinals. So I have Andy Murray winning. And it's Berdych and Wawrinka in the other semifinals. And I have Tomasz Berdych winning, in fact. And I'm starting to feel like Tomasz Berdych's face is slowly turning into Andy Murray, and Andy Murray's face is slowly turning into Novak Djokovic, because Andy Murray keeps winning. He would have won the 2011 Australian Open without the big three, so I have Andy Murray as a back-to-back champion, and Tomasz Berdych keeps losing these semifinals, these finals in a Andy Murray fashion. Now let's go to the 2011 French Open. It's really weird without the big three, really empty. It's Gasquet and Monfils in one of the semifinals. Monfils, the 2008 champion in this scenario, of course, and Monfils is 11-7 head-to-head versus Richard Gasquet. So I have Gael Monfils in that final trying to regain his crown versus Soderling or Murray in the other semifinal. So as I mentioned previously, Murray is 3-2 against Soderling head-to-head. But I have Robin Soderling actually defending his crown, beating Andy Murray and beating Gael Monfils at the 2011 French Open. I think Robin Soderling was a slightly better player in 2011 than Andy Murray. And of course, he is undefeated against Gael Monfils head-to-head. So I have Robin Soderling beating Andy Murray and Gael Monfils and retaining his championship, his French Open championship. Now let's go to the Wimbledon. This was kind of fancy. It could have been fancy because Del Potro lost early to Nadal. He was coming back from injuries, third round. And that was Murray's side of the draw. So it could have been actually Murray Del Potro in the semifinals. That would have been really interesting, really intriguing, tough match. And Murray is, although 7-3 against Del Potro head-to-head, but, Del Potro is a tough opponent. But then I kind of was reading Del Potro's bio, and as it turns out, he lost to Marty Fish randomly that season, and he would have played Marty Fish in the quarterfinals. So I was like, okay, well, let's just have Andy Murray in that final. And it would have been against Tsonga or Tomic. So let's say Tsonga, who's a Grand Slam champion already. And again, it's kind of intriguing to have Tsonga here. But again, Andy Murray is 14-2 against Jo-Wilfried Tsonga. So Andy Murray defends his crown at Wimbledon. He is a back-to-back Wimbledon champion, double Wimbledon champ. And now let's go to the US Open. It would have been also really empty without the big three. Tipsarevic, Dolgopolov versus Tsonga in one of the semifinals. And then Murray and Roddick in the other semifinal. So again, it's just Andy Murray defeating Andy Roddick and Jo-Wilfried Tsonga. So Andy Murray is a triple Grand Slam champion in 2011, and he would have had pretty much the same year as Novak had without Novak, Roger, and Rafa. Really, really crazy. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the first part of this video. I will make the second part, I think, in 1 or 2 days. I will try to upload this as soon as I can. So let me know in the comment section, what do you think? What did you think about this video? Do you agree with my imaginary scenarios? Sorry for the colors pretty much being the same roughly towards the end. Tsonga and Verdasco roughly have the same color, but it's different. Yeah, we are not colorblind. Excuse me for this. And pretty much that's it. Cut.